has held several C-level positions in the past. And I'd like to give it to Priscilla to make a better job of introducing herself to our audience today, and then from there.
Well, I think you've done an excellent job, and I'm very happy to be here in this configuration and with the old team from the 5G accelerator days of early COVID. So definitely, just to add to that, yes, I have an extensive background in global media and pivoted from media into tech, and have been an entrepreneur actually since I was 22. And very excited to launch a new venture called Thrival, which you mentioned, which maybe we can talk about later. And yeah, there you go.
Awesome. Thank you, Priscilla, for doing that. I would like to know a little bit about your investment thesis at Kpis and what are the trends you see right now and what kind of opportunities you're very excited about.
Yeah, so we specialize, we like to look at 5G and media because that's my expertise, and my partner's expertise is in military and government. So we look at deep tech companies with dual use cases in commercial and also in government or military. And so those cross into space, a lot of interesting things in space, a lot of interesting things in the metaverse, and as I mentioned, in deep tech.
And what are the trends you're seeing right now, which you see? Are there any specifically new trends which are being sourced at the moment? Something that is exciting for you to share?
Yeah, well, I like to focus on the metaverse. To me, is completely fascinating. Web 3.0 and DAO. I think that relationship with currency and tokenization and NFTs is particularly exciting to me. And I think it's pretty fascinating, the experience that's being created. It's almost like creating another dimension where you avatar yourself into another world and create this really interesting immersive experience, which is global. And immediate and streaming all at one time. So I find that pretty fascinating. And I think that the creativity and innovation in that space is very exciting.
So what are the criteria for you as an investor when you're investing in a company, either as a VC or a personal capacity? What are the top 5, 6, 7 things that you look for in a company and the founder?
Yeah, excellent. Are you solving a problem? That is the first most important thing. Are you solving a critical problem? Because that's going to help assure your success as a founder, as a startup. What does your roadmap look like? Is it clear? Is it transparent? Is it well thought out? Basically look for people who have a thought process of reverse engineering the problem vis-a-vis the solution. So that's very important to me, that there's a very clear roadmap. Also, the team. For me, the team is critical in terms of the formation of its DNA. And you get a sense of that almost immediately when it's not functioning properly. And no matter how good an idea is, and there's so many, if the team isn't solid and it's not complementary, and that's another point, diversity within the team. It's very important that there's different perspectives, different specialties that come into play. So that's another thing. A working MVP. So we know that, okay, these founders are really dedicated and they have usually bootstrapped by that point. So they know it's going to take a lot of perseverance to succeed and are completely committed to that. And then of course, finally, traction. It's great to see traction, or at least a pipeline which can lend itself to LOIs and and assure a good path forward so that the startup can activate its roadmap.
Awesome. So in DueDash, we have a 5T model. So you covered kind of three of them. So team, traction, technology, which is product as well. And then what we also consider is TAM, which is the market size, which
Absolutely.
is sizing the opportunity for investors to give those 10x returns that they're always looking for. And of course, the timing, is the timing right? Because that's what will give you the product market fit, and that will drive the traction as well. So that's one of the key factors that kind of guides. And for those of you who have probably joined DueDash event for the first time or don't know much about DueDash, I'd like to just add here, it's a comprehensive investor management solution which helps startups become investable, raise funds, and attract investors with speed. So companies are guided through a digital assistant to engage with investors by sharing relevant business information and financial metrics. And that basically helps keeping all the investors, keeping them up to date at all times. So feel free to sign up today, get a free profile for a startup, and you can meet Priscilla also on the platform there. Awesome. So how can a founder evaluate? I know you have a branding and marketing background. So how can, when a startup is starting out and they're still trying to get that MVP and the fitness in the market, and as they evolve the journey through the journey, how should they evaluate their brand? How is the brand growth growing? And what should be the core marketing efforts where they should be focusing on?
Yeah, sure. So very importantly, the brand really has to reflect the values, the core values of the startup and of the team, whatever those may be. And there is a broad spectrum of how that is illustrated, for example, through color. What are the colors that represent the expression of the startup for whatever reason? Is it a bright color? Is it, and what are the core ideas and thought processes? And so that's a thoughtful discussion that has to come about through the founders. So that is the first step in being able to create that template of that color palette, if you will, to understand how you're going to represent, number one. Number two, you need to look at the competition and see what is happening there, what is working, what is not working, how does the brand resonate, how does it travel, for example, how's it going to look when the brand is streamed? How's it going to look when in a digital environment, in a print environment, and consider those environments as well. Is it easy to create packaging if relevant, and create, whatever types of brand collateral that you need to, and thinking about those things. Also, how does your brand create a differentiating effect? How do you cut through the clutter to be interesting? So how are you going to do that? Is it your catchy tagline? Is it because you've come up with this really interesting design? Is it, do you immediately understand what the product is from looking at it? That's very important too, that your brand actually represents the product that you have. And so people aren't confused by that. And I think and then of course the messaging around that is imperative. And I think that's the most challenging thing. The brevity of clear messaging and the transparency of that messaging, it's a lot harder to do than it sounds. And it's the most important thing, because in a very, very brief window of time, you have to be able to capture people's attention. So that's what I would look towards.
I didn't think about that. The competitive analysis should be done for brand. I think you bring a very, very strong point there. And I think the messaging, of course, is part of the branding, which many of the early founders or first-time founders perhaps do not understand. It's not just the logo or the color scheme, but also the entire tone, tonality, and how you're communicating. What is your brand communicating to the outside world? So looking at that, Priscilla, And I know you're a great storyteller yourself, and there has been a lot of emphasis in the last year, especially for a person like me who comes from an engineering background, always struggles to tell the story correctly. So, what is important for you when a startup reaches out to you? Is a pitch deck good enough, or you're looking for something more than that in a personalized message? So, what would be some key metrics and information that you would be looking for? How can a story be told with the, because we are big on data. So in DueDash, we talk about data-driven storytelling. So what would be meaningful for you?
Yeah, I mean, storytelling, as you say, is so important because it creates an immediate connection, which I think critical. If you're going to invest, most investors, I think, have a passion and a caring about wanting to, help the startup succeed. They generally have a lot of experience in their expertise or expertises in some case. So I think being able to create a commonality, a common bond, and why should this investor go on this journey with that startup? And to do that, I think that comes through a passion. I think you can tell when a founder is passionate about what they're doing and they have a very clear sense of purpose for why they're doing it. And they're doing it for the right reasons. And you can tell because their messaging resonates with that delivery, with that message delivery. So I would definitely be looking for that. I'd also be looking for organization. I really like when people are ready, they've anticipated my questions, they're forward thinking, they're organized, and they get to the point. I think that's another thing that we all appreciate. And I think a lot of investors have limited time and limited attention span in many cases. So I think it's important to be able to very, very quickly nail your narrative, nail your story, create that connection, and then get right into it. Get right into the crux of what you're doing, how you're doing it, what your roadmap looks like, what we talked about earlier. You have an MVP, you have traction, you have a roadmap, you have a clear sense of where you're going. I think that's really key. And you have a really great team. And as you mentioned, timing, of course. You can have a great idea and it's too soon for that as well.
Yeah, that's awesome that you say that, because on DueDash, the profiles for the startups, their investment information, the case for the investors, it's all streamlined information, and it's in bite size so that they can digest the information very quickly. And the founders are actually, they basically try their best to keep the information minimal, and they get immediate feedback also if the information is not coming through correctly through to the investors. And likewise, the data room itself is also structured, and there's a progressive disclosure as the conversations are flowing through. So I think you'll definitely enjoy using the platform.
No, absolutely. It's a brilliant architecture and an ecosystem that's so valuable, because what you've done is you've like created a 3D kind of dimension of a look towards venture and innovation, which is readily accessible and very user friendly. And I'm excited about that in terms of creating more efficiencies within my universe as well.
Yeah, and we did the 5G program as a proof
Yes.
of concept and partnership back then, and it ended up successfully. Maybe you would like to share a little bit about that.
Yeah, a couple years ago, Parul and I had the pleasure of launching the first 5G global immersive media accelerator in the world, which was powered by Deutsche Telekom and Median Group RTL and several other sponsors, including DueDash. And what we did is we had our amazing 5G companies actually use the platform during the accelerator to do proof of concept, as Parul mentioned, which has served as a really great foundation to kind of launch a larger architecture and understanding what worked, what needed to be refined, the ease of use that proved out all of the benefits, I think, that you've refined now 2 years later.
Yeah.
Has it been 2 years? Yeah. A
Yeah.
year and a half. Yeah,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah. So I think we ended up raising, I don't know, 6-7 million through that, or was it more than that?
Yeah, I think it was more like 10 or 12 million during that. I mean, it was a really an interesting time of uncertainty, as everyone can remember and has experienced. But it provided a really interesting disruption opportunity for all of our teams, because no one could connect physically. So our teams had all of these amazing virtual connection types of companies, whether it was some form of social or some kind of AR technology that connects people. So it really helped accelerate these companies, and they did very well and emerged with the first 5G global immersive use cases actually in the world.
Yeah, and we basically did the fundraising predominantly through KPIs and metrics, because they were the key communication things, other than, what all can you do if you're not meeting in person, and telling them about a technology which is not there in the market and people don't know how to consume it either. So do you want to share some of the, KPIs and metrics, because they were like early business from that standpoint? What were the most critical metrics and the KPIs that were really resonating with the investors at that point?
Well, as we were in virtual and we were across 6 time zones, as you well remember, Parul, we did not have direct access to the Deutsche Telekom 5G platform itself. So we had to find creative ways to do that across the globe without being able to travel. And I think, one of those was finding a solution through some of the amazing mentors and advisors we had, who helped facilitate some of that localization in testing. So that was very difficult to do. And the teams were very creative in finding a solution for something that was very challenging at the time. And part of the criteria for graduation, I might add, enable to be able to graduate the program, they all had to prove out the operationally on the platform. So I think that was one of the most critical things.
So when you're looking at a investment case, what do you look for in a business model? Because I know you're very particular about that. And how do you kind of evaluate that? And what do you think founders should look into when they're actually presenting the investment case to the investors?
Yeah, that's funny, because I notice a lot of decks that come around, the business model is not well articulated many times. I think that's something that founders really need to focus more on. It's very important that it's very transparent to an investor of how this is going to generate revenue, and that the startup has a clear idea of how to do that. So I really am interested. I love out of the box thinkers who come up with interesting ways to do new business, like finding interesting ways to do revenue share models, finding ways to leverage resources where maybe they're offering the service for free, but they're getting millions of dollars worth of marketing for free, looking for creativity and being able to use the resources that usually, in early stage or pre-series A, you really, you don't have a lot of resources to work with. So what is that creativity there? Is that innovation there? Is that forward thinking there? I'm always looking for that, and I always find that interesting.
Nice. So should a very early stage startup, which is still like pre-revenue, if they have more than 2 or 3 different ways with which they can make revenue, should they present that in their pitch deck, or should they just say, or should they show that with prioritization, this is how we're going to start, and we think in a year or two we can go with that, but what is the primary and what is the secondary revenue? Some kind of a ratio, should they present it like that, or should they just focus on the primary revenue stream?
Yeah, I like to see a comprehensive look forward. And I think that's part of what I mentioned earlier, where, it's clear that a startup has identified a problem, they're solving a problem, and then they reverse engineer the solution to that. So that would show me, okay, that they're here, but they're focused, because that's another thing. You don't want to see a startup that's, I can use Thrival as an example. We have one major product that we want to launch, but we have 5 other formulas. Yes, I mentioned that, but that isn't the focus, because we need to be focused, or a startup needs to be focused on their initial product. So it's not confusing, and it's clear that that's going to get into the market and create a brand for itself to sustain future activity. So I wouldn't make the mistake, and I would call it a mistake, by saying, oh, we have this product and we have that product and we have this product and we have that product. But if you're rolling out something and that's part of your strategy, like in 2023, we're going to do this, in 2025, we're going to do this, that makes sense as part of your roadmap illustration.
Okay, thank you. So Priscilla, there's going to be a rapid fire round now. So something that you'll have to answer very quickly in a few sentences. So share the craziest idea that was pitched to you.
Okay, this is serious. I swear to God, this just happened. Quantum teleportation or time travel. Completely. It was like, what? What? Definitely interested to hear this. So I'm excited to hear this upcoming pitch about interdimensional travel and the possibility for particles to exist in 2 places, et cetera, et cetera. So that was a pretty fascinating pitch that I'm looking forward to finding out more about.
Awesome. Tell me about it after you've heard that pitch.
I don't know. It reminds me a lot of the 5G program. So, with everybody being in different places all at once. So I can imagine it's definitely possible.
Yeah. And who has been your childhood inspiration?
Oh, wow. I would say my grandmother. My grandmother was an amazing inspiration and influence in my life. She was an immigrant to the United States, and became educated in a time where that was very unusual for an immigrant. And she encouraged me to travel, see the world, learn other languages, and to never be afraid to try anything. So I think that worked. she gave me
You speak like 5 languages or more?
Yeah, 5, and learning, 6-ish, yeah. I think languages are fascinating.
Yeah.
Pardon?
Sorry, how does that help, knowing so many languages?
Understanding other languages is understanding how another culture thinks, and understanding the perspective from another point of view that's different from yours. And then all of the cultural sensitivities that go with that. And they're very different, obviously. And again, getting a more universal understanding of how things are very different in some ways, but very similar in other ways, because in the end we all think alike, but how we express that is very, very different from culture to culture. And I think it also helps in personal and business, because you can form an immediate connection with someone so much faster by being able to engage in their native tongue. and of course, it's just fascinating. I mean, there's so much learning that comes with that experience, and because there's all the other things that go with it, the differences in education, the differences in religion, the differences in culture, as I mentioned, in food or whatever it may be. It's pretty fascinating, and I always consider myself like a life student. So always interested in learning more, and I think language is key for that kind of growth.
Nice. So what are you currently reading, Priscilla?
Well, I am reading The House of Gucci right now, which is, yeah, which is really an interesting study of a brand, and the internal struggles of a brand coming from like a family brand and a family business growing into an enterprise, and what that journey looks like. And it's pretty interesting how it came about, and all of the iterations of that brand that's still relevant today, and actually kind of resurrected itself back a few years. It became very relevant again. And yeah, so that's been kind of interesting, especially with the movie that's come out. And of course, the movie is very different from the book. I definitely read the book.
Right. Okay. Good to know. Thank you. And I would like to know, what are your top 3 advices for startup founders?
Yeah. Make sure you're solving a real problem. that problem has a solution that you can own, and that you can be a steward of, so that's viable and achievable. And then make sure that you construct the right success DNA for your startup, because that again is critical. You really have to be able to get along well, to have a good trust with your colleagues, because you're going through a lot of pain and it takes a lot of perseverance. So I think that's another thing, perseverance as well.
Sure. So how can startups reach out to you?
How can they reach out to me? Definitely on the DueDash platform, and through Craftworks Capital. So I'm reachable there. I'm also reachable on Thrival through the DueDash platform, and that's my startup that I have. So I'm reachable on both of those places. And LinkedIn's a little challenging because I think we get bombarded there, but I think being on the platform, since it's so organized, I'll be able to find and manage my communication.
Thank you. So here is your chance, startup founders. If you are media savvy or tech savvy or have some crazy idea, feel free to ask questions here to Priscilla. She is based out of US, as you would have figured by now, but she works across the globe. She has a fair amount of presence in Europe as well, and I'm sure she would be able to answer your questions. I think before we take the audience questions, Priscilla, I had one more question for you. I think we've heard a lot on the social media. There have been a lot of news items going out about the underrepresented founders and the female founders themselves. They're not like they struggle for funding. And usually the audience on DueDash is international, and they're looking for fundraising predominantly from business angels or early stage VCs. What do you think is the right way to approach these investors for the founders who are not non-US founders specifically?
In terms of diversity, you mean, or?
It's also like international founders, then it's also diversity and underrepresented founders.
Yeah, I think fortunately there seems to be much more awareness on looking at underrepresented founders. For example, the company Thrival that I have is female led. it's minority owned, and it's veteran owned. So we kind of check a lot of boxes there. I think that came about organically, but I think that there's a lot more opportunities, and being able, a lot of funds now are being driven by that thesis. So I think that that's readily researchable, and probably something you can find on DueDash, where you can reach out to funds that are really looking to support, this kind of forward motion finally, because there's so much innovation and talent, I think, in some of the underrepresented, communities.
Okay. So I'll take the first audience question here. It's from Mattia Nuti. He says that we are a startup based in Dubai and Italy. We are doing a lot of work to attract US VCs or business angels, but we see that US VCs are more oriented to invest in US companies. That basically limits the possibilities for them to go forward in the US ecosystem. So is there any advice that you can give him to basically figure out who would be the right investors to reach out to, especially the US investors, and who can open the doors for him?
Yeah, I think part of being able to do that successfully is creating a US entity. I think a lot of US investors want to make sure that, for example, you have a Delaware corporation in play. And so that's where I would start. And then depending on the product, of course, you can look at targeted, and I would encourage you to look at targeted investors that are good strategic investors who are really interested to support exactly what you're doing. And I think that that's important because, one, they want to help a lot of times, and they have this amazing expertise. They can open doors. And also in that regard, maybe onboarding strategic advisors that can assist, and probably some US advisors that have those networks, I think could be super helpful as well.
Yeah, I think that's a very good advice, Priscilla. I think that could be one way to kind of tap into the network. Yeah. So we have a question. I know this person again personally, Stefan Weller. So he is a very enthusiastic and a very, very good founder. He said thanks to you first, and then he said, what in your opinion would be a best elevator pitch, and what does it take to get there? What ingredients should be there in the best elevator pitch?
The elevator pitch is the hardest thing to do. And we talked about this earlier, that clarity of message is critical. It's critical for a lot of reasons, because you really have a very short window of time to not only cut through the clutter of everything out there. I mean, you think about all of the bombardment of messaging that we have. So it has to encompass very, very quickly, like, I don't know, in a minute or two, the most a minute, the purpose, why it works, and also why you're the person to make it work. So there's passion there as well. And I think those three things are going to, because you have to create that connection, right? At the end of the day, we're humans and we have a kinetic connection. And I think that transmission of energy is very, very important. And there's a good ability to connect. So you have to connect very quickly, and you have to get to your purpose, your passion, and your ability to succeed. Why it's important.
Do you remember any pitch that comes to your mind right now? I know I made you wake up very early in the morning, but think of a pitch that was really really nice in that direction.
Well, I could tell you probably Thrival's. Thrival is a doctor-formulated peak performance fuel, scientifically proven to sustain physical activity, cognitive function, and metabolic resiliency. So a quick thing like that is very important. So it's enough. You've got to get people's attention. Like, okay, that sounds interesting. So they want to learn more.
Just getting foot in the door, get the interest.
Yeah. I mean, the problem is I haven't been in many elevators lately in the last 2 years. So honestly, a lot of the communication has been different too, right? In the terms of how we're communicating virtually. So you're getting more information than you normally would because you're doing Zooms or you're doing email. Instead of being able to walk down the hall, you have 10 emails to cover that, right? So.
Right. Yeah. No, that's awesome. Thank you. So the next question comes from Sadik. He is actually saying, I think, and also suggesting, is it the lack of projection and patience that is why most startups fall apart? So I think he means like they don't know the time horizon by when they would be successful. I think that's what he means by projection, because it's a lot of uncertainty there. So what would be the most strategic solution precisely here? I think he's just trying to understand how to keep yourself motivated if it is like with a lot of uncertainty. How do you kind of stay focused, keep yourself motivated, and still keep going on that journey?
Yeah, well, the finish line, right? Start with the finish line and work backwards, because the finish line is always going to motivate you. And if you can see the finish line, then you're going to have a solid roadmap.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think it's what you alluded to earlier, Parul, about having KPIs where you have certain milestones that you achieve, that you set up, that are going to get you to that finish line. And I don't know how to explain it other than, you just have to, I think, put blockers on in the sense of you can only succeed, you can't fail. So if that's the equation that we're going for, then how are we going to do that? And since there's not another option, because you're not going to fail, you're going to focus on succeeding. So that is, to me, the foundational strategy, which I really, really like. I like the strategy of creating a really solid foundation, super solid roadmap, and then activate all of the pieces of that ecosystem, like what you're doing actually with your ecosystem for DueDash. It's the same thing. You have all the pieces, you connect all the pieces, and then you activate those pieces. And you're not going to fail that way because you've already thought through to the finish line. And then and not to say that you won't find things that didn't work. So I also think, very importantly, it takes flexibility. You have to stay flexible. You have to pay attention, what is working, what is not working, and listen, because people, not people discouraging you, because I would not listen to that. But maybe out of that, though, there's one thing that someone says that could be very interesting. Like, okay, I can learn from that, or I can make this adjustment, or if I do this differently. I think all of those things are ways to keep yourself motivated and just press for the finish. Because I mean, what is more exciting than when, like yourself, you've got your funding in, you start to see your dream realized, and you activated something for a reason, and something that can help other people most of the time.
I'll just add to it. Surround yourself with people who motivate you, because if you are an entrepreneur and your friends are basically working in corporates and they have stable jobs, they get good paychecks. So obviously you'll not have anything common to talk about. So you'll have to have perhaps different friends and different kind of networks. So you'll definitely need to see how you keep yourself sane and have a mindset.
Well, that's a good point too. I think you have to, it's hard because being an entrepreneur, as you know, is really challenging, but it's exciting at the same time. But you really have to work at, work-life balance. You have to have things, you have to give yourself downtime and in some way to recharge. And I think that's very important, and people don't realize, I think rest is really important. Play meaning, maybe you're a musician, or maybe you like to go to the theater, or, maybe you like running, or whatever it is. You need some activity that helps you balance and recharge, because you can't constantly you can't constantly go without that, because you'll burn yourself out. So that's another thing, being smart about recharging.
Yeah. So this is a question from Abhishek Basu. He's asking, how important is it to do due diligence on investor as a startup founder before reaching out, and also to understand their investment thesis?
I think extremely important, because frankly, you're wasting your time most of the time if you're sitting with an investor who doesn't understand your business, or it's out of their comfort level, because likely, while they might listen to you, they're not going to invest. One, two, a strategic investor is really great, because then you have the benefit of them really being invested, not just financially, but professionally, because they will want you to succeed, and it's something they care about, or they wouldn't have invested. So I think that's very important. Don't waste your time with people who don't get what you're doing. It's like swimming upstream.
Yeah. I mean, if it is, let's say, a fintech investor, and if you want to pitch them a biotech company, they wouldn't understand that,
They
because
wouldn't understand it, and you'd be, most of the time, I'm not saying there aren't anomalies, and some people who have more of a universal view or an agnostic viewpoint, but mostly they don't. Mostly there's a specialty, or take your time and research the investor, see if they can become a strategic investor, because then that can become a whole opportunity for great advice and advisement.
Yeah. So for your benefit, I prepared a course a couple of years ago. It's on our education platform. It's called How to Pitch to Investors, but it basically tells you the preparation, the execution, and negotiation aspects of the entire due diligence process. Basically, it's not about pitching itself, it's more about the execution of it. So feel free to look into that resource. It's currently for free, so you don't have to pay anything for that. That could be a good resource to look into. I think it takes about 20 minutes to go through that. So then there's another question. It's from Sudeep Mondal, that we are an early stage fintech startup based out of India. They're focusing on digital lending on consumer durable products. So they just want to know, would it make sense for them to raise money from angel investors or VCs also internationally?
What network are they leveraging from? I would look at that. So the benefit from an angel, are they going to be able to become an advisor? Will they, what network are you opening that's going to help you achieve your goals? And what is their background and expertise, which is, kind of what we were just talking about. I think that that's important to look at. And then, what does their roadmap look like? Again, we have to reverse engineer. How much do you really need to get where you're going? And also, obviously you don't want to take too much of an investment, so you don't dilute yourself going forward. So I would look at all of those things, and then see what you really need. And then see what you really need, and not overextend, but do it strategically.
There is another question from Tamer. He asks that the problem in the MENA region, that is Middle East and Africa, that the investors usually invest in a revenue generating business. They don't invest in very early stage or idea stage companies. So I think the ecosystem is still early, it's still maturing. So how should startups survive and kind of thrive and break through in such environments? I'm sure you would have seen that happening in US. some years ago. And also in US, different ecosystems perhaps still mimic this behavior. So would you have any advice for him?
Yes, start building your pipeline so that you have LOIs to activate, because those can, you can substantiate so while you're lacking revenue, you can substantiate and in a reasonable argument what amount of money you need to activate this pipeline, and that you could scale very quickly. So I would build out that pipeline intelligently and try to find large large networks that would help you immediately scale quickly, and put those in your pipeline strategy.
Yeah, the focus has to be on revenue generation to kind
Yeah.
of show that as some kind of a guarantee to get the conversations going and then convert them to get
Yeah,
revenue.
I mean, like, for example, I have a pipeline of 75 million. I need 2 million to unlock that, or whatever the case may be, or it's 500,000, or whatever the case may be for the business. But I think coming up with like catchphrases like that, they catch attention, but they make people pay attention too. It's like, okay, how's that work? And then having a timeline so that you know that you can, that's scalable quickly, I think it's important.
Right. So then there's a question from Rishabh. He's asking, how can Web 3.0 hardware-driven startup approach fundraising at an early stage, considering the susceptibility of investors to, they're not many hardware investors out there.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that, please?
I think his use case is Web3 hardware-driven startup.
Hardware.
And hardware and Web3 combination. So then there are potentially not so many investors out there, because there are limited hardware investors, and then it's a Web 3.0 hardware.
Well, okay, definitely there are hardware investors, so of course you're
क्या नाम है इसका?
Sorry,
Priscilla
can you mute
Pesky.
yourself, please?
No?
Sorry, no, I think somebody was unmuted. I'm sorry.
So my solution for that would be to strategically partner with software company and see if there's a way that you can collaborate on solutions so that you can leverage each other's platforms and move ahead more quickly, because again, this goes back to that problem solving. If you're in Web3 environment, you're going to need various software or engagement, whether it's gaming or whatever the case may be. And then of course, being able to, I think, create an ecosystem around that, like we mentioned earlier, tokenization, NFTs, taking a look at that. But I would look at strategic partners that can use your hardware, and then that'll help you move more quickly.
I think that's a good point. Try to figure out a way to create partnerships to open up some kind of potential usage, to get users potentially tested as well, get the word out, and have some successes out of that. And also, it could be a way for other investors who invested in those software companies. They could potentially have a look at this hardware company as well.
Absolutely. You could share investors, you can share, all types of whether there's a user base that can be shared in terms of data, whatever the case may be. I think there's a lot of ways to look at collaboration.
So you spoke about collaboration a couple of times, Priscilla, and I know you're big on that. So what advice do you have for startups in terms of figuring out partnerships and collaborations? What kind of collaborations or partnerships should they actually go for?
For me, my advice would be look for where you're weak. Where's the hole in where's the hole? And then if you can't solve that, who can? And where you're also a strength for them. And I think those are some of the best partnerships because it's a win-win and there's a need that needs to be filled on both sides. And it makes sense because it's complementary. And that's another important point. Obviously, it should be complementary and not, there shouldn't be a lot of overlap, I think, because that helps keep things neutral and not competitive.
Yeah,
And I would look at it like that, very strategically.
great advice. Thank you. So there's a question from Dom, and I don't know if he is a founder or an investor, but I think it's an interesting question he's asking. So he's asking what happens if a project fails, since majority of startups don't last long, and it's good to know before getting into it. So he just, I think, wants to know how do the things actually end? Do they actually, the founders have to actually pay the investors back, or what happens? I think he wants to know.
Oh, well, that depends what you mean by fail. I mean, of course, there's always a risk. Fail, you mean the company goes under?
I guess that's what he means,
Yeah.
or it's not even generated revenue ever, or the team split. I think there could be several reasons for a failure. So he just like, probably he's talking about the doomsday when they decide to shut down the company or something.
Unfortunately, the investors lose, but if I were an investor, I would see what IP could be lifted out of that, and then maybe look at putting together a new team and maybe work with the team to either adjust the idea, resurrect the idea, maybe new fundraising around the idea with new people, because there's always something that can be salvaged from the IP, and or it's the failure, depending on what the failure is, maybe the CEO wasn't the right CEO, and you need to replace that CEO, or they didn't have the right engineers, for example, helping them. So I would look at ways to salvage that before you just, there's always a way to lift something up. And then even in fact, I just gave this advice to someone because they had to shut down their company. In their case, their idea was absolutely brilliant, but so far ahead of its time that it wasn't tracking. And so their company, we ended up finding a buyer for their company for certain pieces of their IP. So I think there's a lot of ways to skin a cat and not just give up. So that's one thought about how to do that.
But I think, what can founders do? Like if they know the company is going down, they can potentially do the same thing. They can also try to find new talent in the company. They can try to talk to their investors to help them, because that's one thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that transparent, oh, excuse me, Pearl, sorry.
No, sorry, I just was saying that this is what we try to propagate to founders through DueDash. Report also the good, the bad, the ugly, show them the right things. And it's not just the money that they come with, they come with a lot of network, and they come with a lot of advice. So they could potentially help you. They can find you the right operators, or they could introduce you the right talent as well. So I think founders should also leverage that as some of the advice that you gave from investor standpoint. Is there anything else that you would like to add to that, Priscilla?
No, I mean, I think that's spot on. I think that kind of transparency is necessary for success. And remember, it goes back, your advisors are part of your company DNA. So that has to work well. And that whole, if you look at it like a cell, the cellular structure has to be healthy, right? If there's one piece of that cell is sick or diseased, it's going to affect the whole cell. So I think that's another reason, as we talked about earlier, why getting and onboarding strategic advisors is so important, because they can really help, they can really help you, or create solutions like we just talked about, like, okay, this isn't working. what can we do before it's too late? Can we lift IP out? Can we make any adjustments? Can we take a pivot? There's all kinds of ways to look at solving a problem.
Yeah. So for founders who probably don't know DueDash, so we also have education platform altogether where we have some free resources, which is templates, as well as some free courses. And we also have a step-by-step process for making your startup investable. It's a holistic approach to build your business and raise funds. It's called Dash to Investability. We've taken care of about 450 questions that usually investors ask, and we have covered that over 9 modules. So go there, check it out, and if you have any questions, you can always reach out to the team members here, and we are there to help you. And Dom, for your last question, this is more of a term sheet discussion, what the terms and conditions would be for that deal, for the investment. So it depends on the investor what kind of terms they will put in a particular investment decision, and what type of investment it may be. So it would also be conditioned to that. So I guess with that, we'll call it a wrap, Priscilla. Thank you so much for making the time. I know it was early for you, so I'm really grateful for you to wake up early and make time for our
No, my pleasure. My pleasure.
investors and enthusiasts. It was lovely to have you and meet you, and it has been a very interactive audience as well. So thank you guys, and go ahead, check DueDash.com. We have a bunch of resources out there. So the platform itself helps startups share their startup profiles, data room, share updates with investors. We are a startup ourselves. We launched in September. So if there are any kinks here and there, we do have a support channel. So please write to us, and we'll try our best to solve the problem as soon as possible. And for the founders who want to do fundraising yourself and also are in the process of learning the whole thing, so we have Dash to Investability course where you can learn how to build a business and raise funding as well, and how to handle all the investors' curveball questions in the due diligence process. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. I wish you all a great day ahead, and looking forward to see you on the DueDash platform.